What's up, my friends? Chilling out here in the garden, talking about starting a podcast. Honestly, I started my podcast as a joke, as a bet against my cousin Johnny, who was saying that it was kind of difficult for him to start a podcast. And I said, look, I'll come up with an idea for a podcast that I can launch over the weekend just to show you that it's not like mechanically hard to start a podcast. So if you are looking to start one or you want to know how it all works, this is the video for you. We are now looking at, I think we have over 10 million lifetime downloads on the Epic Gardening podcast. I've taken a bit of a hiatus from it, about a month off so far. I'm gonna get back to it actually tomorrow and start recording more episodes. But here we go. Here's a podcast. Now, why would you even want to start a podcast in the first place? Number one, just a creative outlet. It's just fun to do. I started a podcast back then because I thought, hey, if I'm talking about gardening and I'm doing it in written form, I'm making videos, I'm making content on social media, well, there are a lot of people who, while they're gardening, probably want to listen to something, and I'll put something in their ears. So the thesis there was, okay, I'll go look at all the podcasts out there in gardening, and in my opinion, it's not a hate against any podcast, it's just they were too long in my opinion, and they weren't really giving you the meat of what you needed to know about a particular plant or pest or disease issue, anything like that. And so I said, okay, well, what if I just gave you literally 1 minute or 3 minutes or 5 minutes worth of just a succinct summary on what to do about a particular thing, how to prune your tomatoes, how to deal with blossom end rot, that kind of thing. And I'll just do it every single day. And so that's what I came up with. The first week I had recorded over the weekend. I launched, I believe, in somewhere around May 2017, and it's 2021. We've hit daily episodes until this recent about a month or so hiatus due to some personal stuff that's going on in my life. I took a bit of a content break this fall, but we've hit episodes every single day, and we've had guests on and all that sort of stuff. So the best reason personally to start a podcast, I think it's just to meet interesting people and learn from them in public so that everyone else can benefit from it. So for me, I'm always trying to learn more about gardening, about soil health, about regenerative agriculture, really any topic that in any way surfaces with what I like to do, gardening, growing, etc. And so I said, well, why don't I just start a podcast so that I can talk to these people and then everyone else can benefit from the conversation as much as I am. And so that was the idea there, selfishly, to start one. And then of course, the business reason was because the more content you make and the higher value that content is and the more formats that you make that content in, the more people are probably going to get attracted and interested in the business and in gardening. And so that's what ended up happening. But to start a podcast, what do you actually need? Almost nothing at all. Especially these days. Back then you needed a little bit more, but almost nothing at all. You need a way to capture your audio. So back then I used a phone. These days I actually have a pretty expensive podcast mic. It's called a Heil PR40. I'll put it in the video description. I have a way to route that audio into the computer. In the past, it used to just be directly routed in. Now I have an audio interface, which I'll also put in the video description. And then you need some sort of way to edit the podcast. Now you could just do it really raw and just boom, straight from your phone into the computer and then just upload it. And for expedience sake, if you're a perfectionist and you just want to get something out in the world, that's probably the best way to do it. Just get it out there. It's fine if it's rough at the start and you can just iterate and improve as you go. But I would say it probably behooves you to do a little bit of editing. I used a program called Audacity before I got a podcast editor. That was on Windows. It's a free program and it's just very simple to use. You just do a couple little manipulations and voila, you can drag a little music track on there, whatever. So the lightest way to start a podcast is just a phone, some very light editing software, and then of course you need a place to host your podcast files, because just like a website, the files have to exist somewhere on the internet to be distributed out to all these different platforms like iTunes, Spotify, etc. You don't upload your podcast to Spotify or to iTunes. You upload it to a host and then it disseminates out from there. So the one that I use is really, really popular. It's old school. It's called Libsyn, Libsyn. And I believe I pay 20 or 30 bucks a month for what has generated, like I said, 10 million plus downloads. So the value is there in a podcast. Now, tips to start one that's actually good, I would say. This goes back to what I always talk about with content, which is do things that people value. Don't do the things you think that they would value. So you really have to be brutally honest with yourself and take all sorts of feedback. And instead of saying, okay, I'm just going to make a podcast that I think is fun, I'm going to talk about what I want to talk about, that might actually work, but chances are what you want to talk about is more likely to only be interesting to you than to be interesting to a lot of different people. And so what I did when I started the podcast is I looked at my website and I said, okay, what are the top 50 pages that people like to read on particular gardening things, like a hydroponic thing, a basil care, basil pruning, whatever they were. I don't remember at the time, but 50 of them. And I said, okay, well, the first 50 episodes are gonna be the topics on the blog that everyone already goes to a lot. And so what I did is I just recorded 50 of those in a row, more or less just summarizing the blog post, but in audio format, trying to be like, charismatic and jovial and have some fun with it, right? But that was the idea. And so I made those, I published those, and then I embedded the podcast on the blog post. And there you go. You've just launched the podcast to an audience of people who are really likely to be interested in the content. If I go to a website and I read, how to prune basil, and it just so happens there's a 2-minute audio that I can listen to while I read, maybe I'm gonna do that. Or maybe I'll say, this guy's got a podcast too. You click over to it, subscribe on iTunes, follow it on Spotify, and there you go. Now, I get comments all the time now of people who listen to the podcast maybe once a day. Maybe they batch the episodes. They listen to them every Sunday when they're out in the garden. They hit like 7 of them in a row. And so that's what I've done with the podcast. So as far as creating something in audio format that I think will do well today, everything's more saturated than when you start, right? So it's the best time to plant a tree was 20 years ago. The second best time is today. Are podcasts dead? No, of course, it's just a lot harder to start a successful one now than it was in 2017. So you kind of want to be as early as possible, but given that you aren't early if you're watching it right now, you should probably just start one if you're thinking about it. The thing I would say is whatever the industry you're in, devour the top 10, top 20 podcasts, figure out what their style is, what's their format, what's their vibe, what's the personality like, and then figure out how you can add something different, something unique that's not being talked about in your space, or at least not being covered in the same way. For me, it was literally just the format, taking 45-minute weekly episodes, not doing that, and then just going to 2 to 5 to 10-minute daily episodes that I recorded in bulk. That crushed, and Epic Gardening, I believe, is the most popular gardening podcast. I don't really know exactly because you can't get great metrics on podcasts, but if not, we're in the top 3. So there you go. If you have any other questions on podcasting, I will definitely do more videos on that, so drop that in the video description. As always on this channel, please take everything I say with a grain of salt. I'm not an expert. I'm just sharing things that have worked for me, and I really think it's important to see if things make sense for you before you just take someone's word and then do something that might take up a lot of your time or money. So my 2 cents, hopefully it helped. Take care, and I'll see you next time.